So today I'm going to cover Battlefield 5 for a final review on the 2-year anniversary of the game. Released after a month's delay, Battlefield 5 hit the market for all platforms on November 20th, 2018. Coming off the heels of Battlefield 1, a return to the roots of the Battlefield franchise in a modern World War II Frostbite game was promising for many. Now Battlefield 5 could have easily been this ideal game, but it objectively failed in that goal. Now, before I get into it, I'd like to say that these are my own personal views of the game, so there is definitely some bias in my analysis of Battlefield 5. You and other players may feel differently, but I feel my reasons cover the game and go over the main points. This will be more of a rambling scripted video, so I'll also have some various Battlefield 5 footage for you to watch, and I'll also put some time cards in the description if you want to skip around. So Battlefield 5 was both a World War II game and a Battlefield game. I'll be discussing how Battlefield 5 did in both of these departments, but Battlefield 5 was automatically set between a rock and a hard place due to it being a World War II game. World War II certainly has expectations with it, as people have learned in pop culture. The battles of Stalingrad, Berlin, D-Day, France, Midway, and the Battle of the Bulge are some of the most famous examples. DICE had much more creative freedom with the more unknown World War I setting of Battlefield 1. But even in Battlefield 1, DICE hit many of the major World War I points, like the battles at Passchendaele, the Somme, Verdun, Argonne Forest, Gallipoli, the Brusilov Offensive, and more unknown battles, like the Russian Revolution and the Civil War in 1919. So when DICE launches with a plan of a World War II game that elects not to cover the major battles of World War II, Battlefield 5 wasn't headed down the right road for success. Now, a lot of people like to mention the botched marketing campaign and the controversial developer messages as a large reason for why Battlefield 5 failed. While the early proceedings of the game did cause a big stir, I don't think they set up Battlefield 5 to be a failure overall. Yes, they were an indication of how the game was going to be, but the biggest thing the pre-launch of Battlefield 5 did was to turn away a large part of the community. Battlefield has never had a massive audience in the gaming community as a whole when compared to games like Call of Duty, so the marketing failures made sure those players would never pick up a copy of the game, and it also turned away some of the dedicated Battlefield franchise veterans. With that out of the way, the two biggest reasons to the failure of Battlefield 5 was the rushed state of the game and a lack of the clear vision for the game. Now, there are many differing opinions to the failure of Battlefield 5, but these two are the root causes for the problems of the game. The rush state of the game led to lots of bugs, low content, and not enough time to iron out the game. The latter contributed to the failure of Battlefield 5 as a Battlefield game, but the inconsistent vision for the game led to the more important failure of Battlefield 5 as a World War II game. Overall, Battlefield 5 did a few things right, but missing out on the major World War II events led to it being a failure. The biggest thing was a lack of a clear vision for the World War II setting. Was it supposed to be a more artistic and eccentric game, like the reveal trailer led on? Or is it supposed to be a more gritty and down-to-earth realistic World War II game, as the attrition system in other trailers showed? Well, the answer to that question is a disappointing I don't know. Evidence for both sides can be seen throughout the entire life cycle of the game. But sadly, the identity crisis continued into the last hours of Battlefield 5. We got goofy St. Patrick's Day and Valentine's Day cosmetics, an outrageous number of gas masks, and controversial custom characters known as elites. Finally, in June of 2020, a year and a half after the launch, DICE went for the more serious and authentic route for World War II cosmetics. In June of 2020, they released British and German uniforms that were accurate to real life. Personally, I run these skins whenever I play, and from what I've seen, many other players use them as well. Now, funnily enough, Battlefield 5's biggest moments were when the authentic World War II content was added. Without argument, the best moment for this game was on Halloween of 2019, when the Iwo Jima and Pacific Storm maps were released and started the War in the Pacific updates. Along with these two maps were many new guns, the American and Japanese factions, and new planes and tanks for the factions. The community was rejoiced, and the game got amazing positive attention, even more than at the launch. The second biggest moment was the final content update for the game in June of 2020. The Americas vs. Germany was retroactively fitted in, a new map was released along with a refurbished one, and the most guns and vehicles were released at one time in the game's history, along with those authentic uniforms. Although Battlefield 5 was cut short by this update, it was a great last hurrah for the game, and was a pleasant surprise for the community. Another highlight was the inclusion of the last Tiger war story that had you playing as a German Tiger tank commander. Regarded as the best single-player mission, these last 3 points show that the community wanted a more realistic and classic World War II game. The best moments of Battlefield 5 was when it strived for the classic World War II experiences. The unseen battles DICE was trying to achieve only created controversy and untapped potential. With all these points considered, Battlefield 5 cannot objectively be seen as a great World War II game. You can call it that?
Pretty much.
Yep. So apart from the mixed failure as a World War II game, Battlefield 5 definitely failed as a Battlefield game. While some point to the Battlefield failures of Battlefield 5 as the main problem of the game, I only see it as hurting the failure of the World War II game. Evidence for this was seen in the release of the Pacific maps. The fact that we got 2 new World War II maps excited the community so much that the constant stuttering on the maps was largely overlooked. If Battlefield 5 could have been a solid World War II game, these mentioned Battlefield game problems could have been ignored. However, given the low amount of exciting content, the gameplay elements were the focus of the criticism for the game. Battlefield 5 primarily failed as a Battlefield game in 4 departments. The largest failure in this department was the amount of controversial Battlefield game mechanic changes. I'll go into these more, but these changes really put off a lot of Battlefield veterans. The other issues for the failure as a Battlefield game could have honestly been overlooked if these game mechanics were more solid. These Battlefield type issues, as I'll refer to them, only serve to make people disinterested in the game that's already thin on content. But for the other Battlefield game type issues, the first one was the stupid amount of bugs in the game. Bugs are annoying, make the game challenging to play, and causes the more casual players the Battlefield franchise could really use to put the game down. The amount of bugs really comes down to the fact that Battlefield 5 was rumored to only have been made in 1 year. With only a year to make the whole game, Battlefield 5 was not a polished product. Even though it was delayed by a month, the bugs were everywhere in the November release. The bugs are patched over in updates, but I always had fun listing the new ones patches brought to the game. So yeah, Battlefield 5 had a lot of bugs, and for some of the best they are V1 rockets would disappear straight through the map. There was invisible soldiers. When zooming in with a tank scope, there would be a large black patch blocking the screen. There was an infinite down state bug, where if you were downed, you would have to leave the game in order to fix the bug. Bad hit registration was very common. Map starting and frame rate drops were almost always in the game, in one form or another. The constant plane engine sound could be heard for all players in the server when a certain plane was flown. There was a horrible timed death bug that looked like you were killed in 1 frame. I will mention this later. The UI incorrectly showed damage values when shooting players, showing that you did more damage than you really did. Game crashes and disconnecting from the game were also persistent. There were times where the screen would freak out like it could cause a seizure almost. The Spitfire aircraft had OP rockets that were just broken. Trees often looked like they were stretched out rubber bands. The end of round report showing your stats and scoreboard totals constantly failed to generate. A visible letter M appeared next to the reticle for all players in the servers when a certain grenade launcher was used. There were many times where players could spawn in as enemy tanks for your team. And lastly, servers were down for certain consoles many times in the game's lifespan. And I definitely missed a few bugs, but those were the biggest ones. Moving away from the bugs, another huge Battlefield type problem was the 2 updates that changed the time to kill in the game by lowering the bullet damage for all weapons. For both of these, the updates were never asked for, they made the game slower to play, and primarily the updates really killed the momentum of the game, specifically the last one. For the first TTK update, it was released on December 12th of 2018. DICE claimed the bullet damage needed to be nerfed because players felt like they were dying too quickly. However, it wasn't the bullet damage that was the problem. It was the previously mentioned time to death bug that was the issue. The community was rightfully angered at this change, given it was uncalled for, and that the one thing people enjoyed about the game, the more lethal gunplay, was taken away. The complaints were heard, and 6 days later, a patch was released that changed all the stats back to normal. DICE gave the community a promise that these kinds of changes would not happen again. However, the promise was short-lived, because the infamous 5.2 update lowered the TTK values even more in some cases compared to the previous update. The 5.2 update rolled around on December 5th of 2019, and in reality, it was to make the game easier to play for the Christmas noobs. DICE claimed they lowered the bullet damage to reduce the amount of players leaving the game, even though it was all the other issues causing Battlefield 5 to have a lower player retention. The 5.2 update killed the recently released specific content hype Battlefield 5 had going for it. DICE had a chance to change the game around with the Pacific updates, giving the game the most positive attention it had ever had. But that chance was blown out of the water with another disastrous update. The 5.2 update was eventually rolled back in the 5.22 update. However, the damage values were still lower before than the 5.2 patch, and I feel DICE gets too much praise for fixing a problem they created. Now, the third Battlefield type issue is the cheaters. Being on console, I don't have to come across wild cheaters, but on PC, the cheaters run wild. Battlefield 5 doesn't have a working anti-cheat system, so the cheaters are able to play for months in some cases without being caught. It's especially worse in the Asian servers, where cheaters are even more frequent. All the cheaters do is to kill the longevity of the game by polluting PC servers, so something has to be done for the next Battlefield title. Now for the controversial Battlefield game mechanic changes, and there were a lot of them. These were new and arguably revolutionary for the franchise, and ruffled the most feathers ever in the Battlefield series. Starting off with the biggest one is attrition. Attrition is easily the biggest change Battlefield 5 brought to the franchise. Attrition was meant to encourage team play, but with the average Battlefield player not as well informed of game mechanics, it led to more frustration overall. Attrition went through many levels of development, with at the pre-launch status being very hardcore. But in the modern state of the game, attrition has practically been removed. One feature that still remains is the inclusion of the ammo and health dumps, which are caches that resupply health packs and ammunition upon visiting them. Now, ammo distribution has had less changes overall, with support players still being able to throw out ammo packs. However, when spawning in, players generally get less ammo than in past Battlefield titles, making support classes in the ammo dumps even more important. Health and healing, however, made a radical shift in Battlefield 5. Again, the medics are still able to use health packs and health crates to heal teammates on the field, but the ability for all soldiers to heal back to maximum health was removed. Instead, soldiers carry a health pack on them, and when using it, they would restore to full health. However, after using it, players could not restore to full health unless healed by a medic or if they picked up another health pack. Both the health and healing changes made in Battlefield 5 made it more of a game of running around in search of an ammo and health dump instead of getting into the action. Players are more often worried about their health than if they can get a good kill streak. Like mentioned earlier, attrition was meant to encourage team play, but the average players don't understand these game mechanics. Attrition really killed the worth of independent and skilled players who didn't need to rely on teammates in the past. To summarize attrition, DICE never stuck with the plan for whether they wanted it or not, and the player base got caught up in the mess of it. Getting away from attrition, here are just some of the many controversial Battlefield game mechanic changes Battlefield 5 brought us. Keep in mind that some people dislike them and some like these new changes, so opinions differ, but overall the general feeling I got was that these did more harm than good. First off, medium machine guns, basically the light machine guns from previous titles, were only be able to fired while using the bipod. This forced a campy playstyle in corners that aggravated many. Medium machine guns were practically useless when fired from the hip, but borderline overpowered when using the bipod, so it made for some very situational gameplay. Vehicles also suffered from the ammo and health dumps as previously mentioned. Tanks were clumsy to control in close quarters, and due to the fact that they needed to visit a resupply station so often, tank gameplay became very campy and annoying. Planes also took some interesting turns as well. Before, in previous Battlefield games, planes were good at one thing, like good at ground attack, but weak against air. The main issue with planes in Battlefield 5 was that they were overpowered in many situations. The fighters, for example, in Battlefield 5, were great at dogfights, while also having strong infantry weapons. Certain bombers were perhaps the most powerful in the series, while also being competent at fighting aircraft. It created a weird balance where the infantry player was often the victim. Other annoyances with planes was that planes stalled out at high altitudes, being hard to control. Planes were overall more clumsy to control, and the air to flak balance is simply atrocious, to name a few plane problems. The soldier movements also got a new update as well. Most of it was really good, like the rolling, crouch running, and ledge grabbing. However, sliding turned into more of a Call of Duty type slide. Some liked this, but for others it felt out of place in a World War II game. The visibility of soldiers also took a downgrade in Battlefield 5. The overall lighting took a hit, and this led to soldiers becoming more hard to spot. DICE tried adding a few fixes, like adding a distance haze in the beta, that also happened to destroy the colors of the game. A personal spotlight was eventually added to soldiers that helped a good deal, but the game still has harder soldiers to spot than in past Battlefield titles. Animations caused quite a stir as well. With the more realistic feel of the game, there were many animations for climbing over walls, using melee weapons on people, and the biggest ones were the exiting and entering vehicle animations. Animations, while looking cinematically cool, only slowed down the gameplay by taking control out of the player's hands. The lack of attachments for guns was another big change. Back in Battlefield 4, there was a great customization system for adding lasers, sights, grips, and all sorts of things onto your weapons. Into Battlefield 1, this system changed to having different variants of the same gun that excelled in hipfire, suppression, or accuracy, for example. And in Battlefield 5 it changed yet again, where the players could add weapon perks to the guns as they ranked them up. Weapon customization was primarily cosmetic only in Battlefield 5, so this upset more of the veteran player base. Now in Battlefields 1 and 5, they were both limited by the time frames the games are set in, being the World Wars, for what could be added to the guns. This caused a debate in the community whether the Battlefield franchise is based on epic moments found in the Great Wars, like in Battlefield 1 and 5, or whether it's a customizable modern game, like in Battlefields 3 and 4. The assignment system that unlocked weapon skins and in-game currency was a complete train wreck. Unlike previous titles that had assignments tracked when a player contributed to the progress, Battlefield 5 only allowed players to have 4 activated at one time. Once a player completed an assignment, they would have to leave the server to activate a new assignment. Also, at various points in the game, completing assignments or having them active would cause the game to stutter and lag. If that wasn't bad enough, the requirements for the assignments were outrageous, arbitrary, and actively had players not contributing to the objective. For one example, there was a gold weapon skin that you could unlock that asked players to get 30 kills over 30 meters with a submachine gun. 30 kills may be possible on a good game for players, but with the random requirement for kills over 30 meters with an SMG, this makes the challenge stupidly difficult, as 30 meters is outside the range for a submachine gun. Whoever wrote the assignments clearly never played a Battlefield game. Instead of showing mastery for a weapon, assignments only cause frustration for the players. The in-game currency called company coins were often hard to obtain in Battlefield 5. Company coins unlocked new gun perks, vehicle perks, as well as the weapon, soldier, and vehicle skins. However, the skins in the game were completely overpriced, and if players bought the skins instead of weapon perks, they would bankrupt themselves. On top of that, there were many bugs that made it hard to obtain company coins, and not enough company coins were rewarded after rounds. And for one last change, Battlefield 5 had many game modes that were taken in and out of playable servers. With so many servers, it split the player base into half-filled servers and annoyed the community when the favorite game modes were taken out and changed for others. Now I have a miscellaneous list of Battlefield 5 problems that I wasn't too sure of where to put them. This game had a lot of issues, so these are the ones at the bottom of the pot. First off, there was a competitive 5 vs 5 mode that was cancelled even after it had been announced, therefore missing loads of data mine content the game could have gotten. Kinda similar to Battlefield 1's Incursions, I don't really think Battlefield 5 should be focusing on these smaller game modes. Leave that gameplay to Call of Duty. The Firestorm Battle Royale mode was a half-baked attempt at the genre. It saw little support after it was launched, and caused little positive attention for Battlefield 5. The biggest thing that it was not free to play. Instead, players had to have the full Battlefield 5 game, a $60 price tag. Looting was also an issue, and the game didn't cause the hype that Battlefield 5 needed. The live service model Battlefield 5 adopted was a mixed success. Live service updates don't split the community like with buying premium, but live service allowed DICE to drip feed the community content and dragged it through the mud as the delays mounted up. While I prefer premium for the content it demands from the developers, it's very likely we'll be getting live service again in the next Battlefield, so hopefully we'll see some improvements on it. Battlefield 5 also had some long loading times. It will be better in the new consoles with the solid state drives, but leaving servers took a long time, like when you had to leave servers to update your assignments. The Deluxe Edition was a poor deal, and quite honestly a ripoff compared to who you talk to, for the extra money it demanded from consumers. The extra content was not substantial, and it could have included so much more, like the elite characters, and more money-exclusive cosmetic items. The practice range included doesn't really have that much content in it. Most of the vehicles can't be played with, and the weapons can't be modified for experimentation. A practice mode was added that explained the basics of the game about a year later, but that was separate from the practice range. And at least for me, the decreased quality of the lighting and sound design is my biggest personal problem with Battlefield 5. When compared to Battlefield 1, Battlefield 5 feels flat and lifeless, and it's the main reason why I continue to play Battlefield 1. So to wrap up, Battlefield 5 had a lot going against it. Questionable marking, a flawed game vision, and a rushed state of release, all added to the failure. So after all is said and done, I'd rate Battlefield 5 a 6 out of 10. With all the content released and somewhat less bugs, it's not a bad deal at the current moment. But when taking all of it into consideration, the score will likely be lower depending on who you talk to. It's a shame Battlefield 5 had to be such a poor franchise entry when I joined in, but I have some good memories playing it. For the next game, known as Battlefield 6 by the community, it's about a year from release and has the full might of the DICE studio behind it. With more time and effort being put into the next game, it seems like a good fortune for the community. Although I am still cautious given the failures of Battlefield 5, so we shall have to wait and see. I put in a good deal of effort into this video, and I know it turned out to be a little longer, so thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this biopsy of Battlefield 5. I feel with this final review, we could put this game to bed and move on. So again, thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.